sharing today. I'm going to go straight into it without talking too much. So our first speaker is Maxine Hyde, the Vice President of NUT.
Actually, I think you're the ones that deserve the applause for finding the room. I might have an O-level in geography, but I was really challenged. So well done for coming here. And I'm really, really proud to be invited to today's meeting. I think these are really, really important. The whole atmosphere when I walked in slightly late was very positive and very powerful. And I want you to know that, because the biggest thing that we have to fight at the moment is the belief of lots and lots of people that they can't make a difference, because such awful things are happening, and such awful things are happening so quickly. Huge tsunamis of change that are not change for the good. And so that's why it's important to realise that you can make a difference. It's all right, come to the front there. Hello. It's a very wide topic, so the chair has wisely said if I speak for about 10 minutes, and I'm sure Erin will do the same, because it's about interaction, it's about questions, it's about comments, really, this session, isn't it? There's a wonderful irony in the title, because we know what it means, but in England, when you say public education, you think of public schools. And indeed, public education in that sense is very well protected, isn't it? Scholarships, charities, all sorts of things. The ruling class look after their own. And in fact, what's happening is a tremendous attack on state education. I don't want to stray too much in things about campaigning, but I thought what might be helpful is if I give you what I see as an overview and then a couple of other things. 3 quotations I'm going to use during this talk. The first is from a man that I admire greatly, and that's Nelson Mandela. And he says, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And indeed it is. And it's being used as a weapon against most people, against most children at the moment. I was of the generation that came from a family that had no exams. Well, my mother's telecommunication exam, telephonist exam. But apart from that, no qualifications. But I was privileged to stay on at school with no debt. I didn't need an education maintenance allowance because there were all sorts of subsidies. I then went on to university, and I left with no debt because there were no tuition fees that I paid, and I had a grant from my local authority. How different for our young people nowadays. We already know that the abolition of the education maintenance allowance, and I know they say there's a little bit of money for some very deserving children, but actually it's not enough. Children are stopping education as soon as they can because they can't afford to travel to the colleges. They can't afford to eat while they're at the college. And there's something seriously wrong with that when we're supposed to want a world-class workforce of highly skilled workers. We know, and everyone knows, that in the global markets, what we can bring are higher skills. But these young people, children in my view, but young people are not being allowed to continue their education because they can't afford to. They're facing also, those who do manage to stay on, there are 20% cuts to post-16 education. 20% less. Now, how can that be? I'm a science teacher by trade, and I can tell you that what happens there is they've cut all the practical stuff because it's expensive. Yet, a scientist who gets an A-level but is absolutely useless at practical skills is not going to be very employable unless they're going to be a theoretical physicist. And not many people go on to be theoretical physicists. You want them to have the practical science skills as well as scientific knowledge. So that's seriously under attack. And then if they do make it to university, and I do a lot of work with young people encouraging them to study STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and maths, And I can tell you that they're really, really worried. And these are talented young people who we should be encouraging for the benefit of all our society to study, are saying, I'm really worried, I don't know that I can afford to leave university with this huge debt. So that's the situation for a lot of our young people. Right at the other end of the educational scale, we've got early years foundation stage. The government is very carefully dismantling early years education. Now, I know that you sitting here understand that there's a big difference between early years education, led by a qualified teacher, and childcare. Both are important, but they're different things. So, early years education is, surprise, surprise, more expensive than childcare, but it serves a different purpose. Where we have children from disadvantaged backgrounds, it's early years education that can actually make up for any deficits that they have. That means that they can start school, primary school, running, and can flourish, that they'll have the skills. But it's being cut. There are fewer nursery schools, and they're saying you don't have to have qualified teachers now in children's centres. Children's centres are important, so is early years education. Our children should have both. And I'll give you, for instance, which is my own oldest grandson's experience. He went to what I thought was a nursery school, and he loves playing in water. My goodness, did he love playing in water. He flooded our garage, it was great. But his school let him play with water every day. He didn't do anything else, he just played with water. He played with water and came home soaking wet. He came home so wet so regularly that he began to be chafed, to have sore parts of his body. My son's partner gave them fresh clothes, so he had a change of clothes and so on. But it just kept on happening. And that's because he wasn't at a nursery school. He was at some sort of private voluntary provider. And they didn't know that just playing in water is not good enough. That there have to be guided choices. One of my dear colleagues is the head of a nursery school, and I know that in her nursery school, children play with water, but they also play with sand, they also use books, they sit down and they have sharing and circle time, and to see those young people sitting down quietly and listening to each other, aren't those skills that we could do with for life? They're serious skills that Mr. Gove hasn't got, I can tell you, no listening whatsoever. So that's the difference between childcare and well-meaning people and early years education. Guided choices, wide range of experience, children safe, looked after, but learning. Now, Miss Truss doesn't think that it's learning when you're playing in a sandpit or whatever. She doesn't understand about the wide range of skills. The only thing that she, like most of the cabinet, understand is education, where you sit behind tables and you write a lot on paper. That's what they think education is. That's what they think working is, and it's not. And because they think that, the whole of primary education is under attack at the moment. We're having more and more tests on children, even testing nonsense. You know, that's what the phonics test is, not real words, you just test them. And so clever children who can read, because their parents and their teachers help them, will see a word like strom, which is a phoneme, and they will think, well, that's not a word, but storm's a word, very topical word actually, as it happens, and so that's what they read out, and they failed. Instead of being, applauded or asked why they said that, it's a pen, and they fail. And we're saying no child should fail at 5 years old. And there are massive changes being made to the secondary curriculum. But I'm going to just end with a couple of things. First of all, primary is education in its own right. Another thing that people think is that serious education doesn't begin until secondary school, and that's quite wrong. Serious education begins the moment you're born. You learn and you keep on learning, and we want the best possible things. The second quote that I'm going to give really just, and I'll save so on to the second workshop, I think, just actually encapsulates what I've been saying and why my union is so worried about what's happening to education. This is from Einstein, another hero of mine. He says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its entire life believing it's stupid. And our children deserve better, don't they?
Thanks for that, Maxine, that was brilliant. Well, our next speaker is Kiely. Erin is the NUS Black Students Officer, and he's been one of the key organisers for the Student Assembly against austerity, which is happening next week, and I'm sure he'll have a couple of words to say about that. He's been an absolutely inspiring leader in the student movement, so please give a warm welcome to Erin Kiely.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you very much, Maxine. That was excellent. I'm really proud to be speaking at this session because protecting public education, it's been students that have really been at the forefront of the fight to reject austerity and fight back against what are really disgusting policies by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. We fought in 2010 because the Tories had unleashed one of the biggest assaults on our education young people in a generation. Tuition fees trebled from £3,000 to £9,000 per year. The education maintenance allowance, a vital lifeline that got me through education and enabled me to become the first person in my family to complete college and go on to higher education, cruelly abolished. University teaching budgets were cut by up to 80%. Wide-scale privatisation, massive amounts of job losses, library resources cut. Ultimately, the worst thing and the worst tragedy of it is that tens of thousands of young people should be in education are not, and they're going to be denied the opportunity to do that. And it's obviously not just austerity as well that's been used to attack students. Last year, we had to fight against the attempted deportation of thousands of students from London Metropolitan College. And most recently, we had to campaign against the ban on the veil at a college in Birmingham. And all of this is, thanks. But all of this is absolutely part of a coordinated attack using racism to distract people from the realities of austerity and especially the impact on education. But obviously, make no mistake, there's more attacks on education to come. They've got the student loans book set to be privatised, which would mean a massive increase, will mean a massive increase in the levels of student debt. We've seen the introduction of fees and loans into further education, and it's widely expected that obviously we'll see another round of education budget cuts. In Wales, we've seen 65 million slashed from the higher and further education budgets already, so it just shows exactly that there's more to come. If you thought it was bad in 2010, it's set to get a lot more worse. But obviously in the face of all of this, it's students that have led really kind of an inspiring fight back with massive demonstrations, occupations, walkouts in schools, colleges, and supporting our staff on the picket lines when they go out on strike. Obviously we must have, we lost the vote in Parliament on tuition fees and EMA. Obviously let's be clear that this struggle and this fight has left a massively politicised generation of young people who know exactly what the Tories and the government stand for. Because actually, if it was up to young people, these people would never be in power in the first place. If it was up to us, the Tories and Lib Dems would never be, not only be kicked out in 2015, they'd actually have zero chance of ever getting elected again into power. And that's because students are suffering. We know exactly who is to blame. NUS did a recent survey of about 2,300 students, and it found that 80% of students do not have enough money to live on, with 1 in 5 having turned to gambling in a desperate bid to support themselves. And most shockingly, and something that I find just thoroughly disheartening, 1 in 4 students said that they would consider selling their body for medical trials or take a job in the sex industry. And I think that's an absolute disgrace and a shame on our government, because it is really just shocking to see and shaming to see a government of millionaires who all receive free education themselves trying to kick away the ladder of opportunity for young people and the poorest in our society, trying to throw us on the scrap heap. Because obviously how can a society move forward if it doesn't educate its youth? The Tories don't have an economic policy for the 99%, they have one for a tiny, tiny minority of society. They only care about the banking sector, but that won't employ everyone. Where's our investment in things that we need, green jobs, and they're investing in nuclear power plants, but that's not going to get us anywhere ever. How are we going to have that skilled workforce that Maxine talks about, that will help rebuild our economy, tackle the issues like climate change, curing diseases, and creating new technologies that will move forward society? And obviously, rather than this, the government says there's no money at all, there is no alternative. Well, obviously, how can that be when there seems to always be money for nuclear weapons and dropping bombs on third world countries? Obviously, our message should be absolutely clear: drop the cuts, not bombs. And far from being a burden on the taxpayer, investing in young people and education specifically actually benefits the economy. For every £1 invested in education, the economy expands by at least £2.60. And as such, Britain invested in billions in providing free education, which would provide young people the opportunities to fulfil their potential and also help grow the economy and create jobs. And that's the alternative that's worth fighting for. And I'm really proud to say that the student movement actually hasn't given up. Earlier in the year, we saw fantastic actions around Sussex where students were fighting management over the loss of 265 jobs and privatisation. We've seen FE students, 16 to 18-year-olds, fighting against the government's cut to EMA with days of action and winning the support of over 60 MPs. And the most promising is obviously the Student Assembly Against Austerity, which is happening on the 2nd of November. Which I'm helping organise along with Sam, many other students, because we have to resist, we have to fight back. And we welcome all of you to come if you're students, and obviously tell anyone about it, because we really want to keep all these issues on the agenda and keep on campaigning. And also, when it comes to strike action that's been taken already or taken in the future, we'll be there supporting everyone out on strike, because it's about the wider fight of defending education, defending the ability of everyone to receive a decent quality life and the way forward. We've also got a day of action on the 5th of November. Hopefully you'll all be taking part in that. We kind of basically want to throw austerity on the bonfire, so hopefully we can do that. Maxine gave a few quotes, and some of my favourites as well that she said, but I've got one that's probably my absolute favourite, and we use it a lot in the Black Students campaign. It's by Malcolm X, and it is: education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. So obviously let's have those words inspire us in our fight back against the government and defending public education.